You're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. I'm Bill McIntyre here with Jon Gallo for another edition of this week's Long Island News, the news show that brings you news stories about Long Island and about Long Islanders. We're very glad to welcome back to the show New York State Senator John Brooks, who represents the state's 8th Senate District, which, as of now, covers large portions of Long Island's South Shore in eastern Nassau and western Suffolk counties, including parts of communities from Roosevelt to Wyandanch. Senator Brooks, following his service in the National Guard as a medic, had worked in the insurance industry and has been an active volunteer firefighter for 50-plus years. He was elected to the New York State Senate in 2018, where he currently serves as chairman of the Committee on Veterans, Homeland Security, and Military Affairs, in addition to being a member of the Disabilities, Education, Insurance, Libraries, Local Government, and Mental Health Committees. All reasons that we're very grateful to have him here today. Wow, you got a full plate, huh?
Indeed, indeed.
Well, we appreciate you carving out some time for us. Of course, as always, Senator Brooks. Of course, Bill is one of your constituents, and certainly we're happy to have that interface, for the public here in this format. So we do want to start this discussion with your general thoughts on the New York State budget being passed, and in terms of how that will impact Long Islanders, particularly in your district, and then we'll kind of move into your priorities for the remaining Albany session.
Okay, so as you know, with every budget, there's good news and bad news at the end of the day. And we pass the budget in segments. So sometimes you look at a piece of the budget and there's 5 good things in there and 2 bad, and you have to weigh out where you are. So that's just part of the budget process. For me, in the budget for the last 16 years, the volunteer fire departments in the state of New York have been trying to get the ability to recover medical expenses from the rescue calls to help reduce taxes that they charge. And the last 3 years, we passed the bill in the Senate. We did again this year. But it was hung up in the Senate. So what I did, we weren't sure what was going to happen. So I went to the majority leader and the governor, and I said, I'd like to put this in the budget instead. So we were able to put the cost recovery program into the budget, which is really good news for homeowners across the state, because we're estimating that there's going to be the ability to recover about $100 million in medical costs. And the recovery, the bill goes to the insurance company or to Medicaid or Medicare, whatever may be the insuring agency for people. There was a quirk in the law that excluded fire departments, volunteer fire departments, but included everybody else. So we had a long ongoing battle with some agencies on this, but finally we got that through. Another thing we were able to get into the budget, which is important, that, as you said, I chair the Veterans Committee. Well, the Veterans Department in the state of New York is at the lower end of agencies in terms of prominence. We were able to elevate that department, which basically, for lack of better terms, makes it a cabinet position with the governor. And I believe that's going to elevate the department, give us an opportunity to do more with the federal government. Right now, round numbers across the state, we think about 17% or so of the veterans eligible to get service from the VA are taking advantage of it. Many of them don't know what's available to them or not aware. By elevating this department, we think we can increase that number, which could literally bring billions of dollars more of additional assistance to the state. Also, it just shows the importance of a veteran. We've got between 700,000 and 800,000 veterans in the state of New York. And in many areas, there aren't good programs. I'll use a term, and I use that very loosely. But we've been able to expand programs. We've really increased the Dwyer program, which is a a peer-to-peer program that's really had some very positive effects on suicide rates and the rest, and we're trying to continue to improve that. And I think with the elevation of the department, we can communicate more with veterans, make them aware of programs that are available to job fairs that may be coming up, housing opportunities, and all the rest. So within the budget, those were two things that were in there. Obviously, we made some adjustments to the bail reform. I think more has to be done there. I believe that we've got to recognize judges need to have the ability to make adjustments with what they see in front of them. I don't believe we can have a situation that who gets bail or not is a checkoff system. If you meet these things, you're allowed to have bail, or if you're on the list, I think we have to assess the what many people disagree with, but I think risk is a consideration that we have to make in dealing with bails. I think the sad thing, and when you go back to why the bail reform was done in the end, you had people in prison for extended periods of time that never got before the court.
Yep.
Yeah.
Many of these people were innocent, but they'd be in jail 2, 3, 4 years before they got to court. So one of the things we got to do is turn around to the courts and say, hey, what goes on here? We've got to get to the point where we're processing this stuff more rapidly. Mm-hmm. I had to deal with a legal matter on something, and every time it got to court, it was delayed. The judge wasn't available. The attorney. It went on for years.
Right.
That's nonsense. If you got a situation, if you're an attorney and you're taking on too many clients and you got to do that, you know what? Don't take on all those clients or increase your staff. But I think sometimes we say the roof is leaking in life. And we go in the basement to drain the water and think that's how we fix it.
The light's better down there. Yeah, we can see what's going on.
Yeah. So we're going to have to start saying, all right, our courts are backed up. How do we clean that up? Do we temporarily put on a lot more judges and blow this stuff through? Do we put certain restrictions? Do we not allow all of, you can push it off twice and then you got to be there, period. I don't know the answer.
Yeah.
But I think
I think it's a kind of scary trend, though. This has been going on for 25 years where like an algorithm is our answer.
Yeah.
And there's nobody watching the shop in a lot of these algorithm-driven occurrences or outcomes. And when somebody finally does come and look, that they realize that coming off the conveyor belt, all the stuff was going into the wrong bin. There was nobody there to see it. What are you going to do? That to me is
just to run back quick to the budget for a little bit. Mm-hmm. We did a lot in the area of improving funding to the school districts. There's going to be a lot of money available to address mental health issues, upgrade the internet connections around the state.
Law.
Yeah. We've got additional funding here coming to Long Island, $350 million for additional projects to create new opportunities for myself. One of the projects I've been trying to get put through State University of Farmingdale, or Farmingdale State, has been trying to get a technology building done. I think this is something we want to do. Farmingdale is one of the unique colleges in our state that's actually growing. And they're in a position right now where they have to turn people down, not because they're not acceptable as an applicant, but they don't have the room. So I think it's important that we let them expand. I think there's a real awareness out there right now that mental health is a real issue between people who've had problems before, obviously, and the pandemic has caused a lot of issues. So we've done that. So I think there's a lot of good in the budget. I would like to have seen, and I argue and will be arguing till the end of session, greater property tax relief and the funding of education. As you know, many of our school districts are paying 70, 75, 80% of the cost of education solely by property taxes. In many communities here on Long Island, they have a real stranglehold in that they have no commercial property tax base.
Right.
So schooling is principally funded by either residential property taxes or state aid. And for some districts, the formulas that we use for state aid don't work well. So you end up paying 70% or upwards of the cost of education. For many people, that's $15,000, $20,000, depending on your district and the value of your home. And as you know, we've got reforms in the federal tax law that put caps on the deductibility of local taxes.
Yep.
We officially, if you will, the federal government basically said $10,000 is enough. Well, most of us, our property taxes are more than $10,000. So we're in a position that we don't get full deductibility, and we get, the incredible thing when you used to joke, someday there's going to be taxes on taxes. Well, we're there. We tax our taxes now.
Yeah.
So I do have legislation that would put a cap on property taxes, and the way that would work, the school district could tax for up to 50% of the cost of education by property taxes.
Okay.
And that's the end. Then the state's going to have to come in. So for Long Island, for many districts, that would be, depending upon where you are, a 20 to 30% cut in your property taxes.
Yeah, and that I'm sure people would be happy about.
Oh yeah, I don't think we'll get anybody arguing against that.
No.
Not a lot of opposition memos from the public on that one.
And we're in a position to fund that right now. That we can do. And again, when you think about here on Long Island in particular, we've seen a big increase in the value of homes right now. We know in Nassau County, at least, the assessment system is just broken, period. So you've got a situation where someone says to you, which many years ago had some merit, your financial condition or ability is best demonstrated by the value of your house. Now, you have people that bought houses, say, 50 years ago, just for a number. Maybe they bought those houses for $10,000, $15,000. They've appreciated over time, maybe to $800,000, just for numbers. But that doesn't mean their wallet has. So we're in a situation where we're taxing somebody by the value and says that's it. When we look at a house, if you had, and we'll do easy math here, if you had a house you bought for $500,000, you're going to be taxed on that as you having the ability to pay $500,000. If you happen to have a $400,000 mortgage, you got equity of $100,000 in that house, but we're taxing you as though you own it free and clear, $500,000. So the system is broken, and we've got to change it. The program that I have, when we put the cap at 50%, statewide, it would cost $1.4 billion to fund that.
Okay.
But it would also reduce property taxes by $1.4 billion. It's revenue neutral in the end.
Which is an important thing and difficult challenge sometimes to meet with these programs, but that's important.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna push it. We're gonna be doing a press conference probably 2 weeks, trying to get everything to try to push this in the closing sessions. I tried to get it in the budget. I couldn't get it in there. I made 3 swings at the bat with the budget, the veterans program, the fire department, and the taxes. I got 2 out of 3. So that's not too bad.
That's a good average by baseball standards, of course.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Let's remind our listeners that they are listening to this week's Long Island News here on 90.3 WHPC, the radio voice of Nassau Community College, with Bill McIntyre, myself, Jon Gallo, and thankfully joined for the time being here by State Senator John Brooks, who represents New York's 8th District out here on Long Island. So certainly, as you laid out, Senator Brooks, good to see that you were able to get some of those policies that will impact positively Long Islanders through the budget. And as you mentioned, a lot of the budget, people hear about the high hotly debated press items, but there's a lot of non-controversial funding. There's the school funding, there's vets funding, there's funding for senior programs, etc. There was additional CUNY and SUNY funding, I know, which was one of those issues that a lot of people were certainly advocating for, and hopefully will impact schools like ours, Nassau, and the ones that you mentioned too, further out in Suffolk. But I guess turning to maybe some of those other issues. I know one issue that was removed from the budget and was a show of maybe the public kind of outcry on it, and legislators like you kind of responding, was the ADU legislation. So it is our understanding, correct, that basically all elements of that and transit-oriented development have been pulled, right? That was something that
and so when I talked to the governor on that, because we did have a meeting, those of us from Long Island, the governor, that's kind of when she pulled the plug on that whole issue. And I came from two vantage points. One of those was a fireman. And as you know, I've been doing this for 53 years. When people are altering homes and often there's a financial necessity in why they take somebody in, some of that work's not always done right. Mm-hmm. And we get in a situation, for example, a basement apartment, you're generally going to have one way out. We should never have somebody living in that situation. You saw what happened in the city with that flooding, where some people were killed.
Yeah.
And we don't always do the work right either. Or we take a garage and convert that into an apartment. It wasn't designed for that purpose.
Yeah, the egress and stuff like that.
So I questioned that from a firematic standpoint first. That you got to make sure this stuff is done right, and most of it's done without permits and everything else. So that's a problem. And then we have the economic impact of that. Yeah, it's a good idea that a senior could rent out part of their house to help them pay the bills, and we can set that process thing. But this thing was thrown out as an idea on a wholesale basis, with a whole lot of concerns, and I think she realized that this is not the way to do it.
Yeah. But in a way, that was the way government's supposed to work, right? She's supposed to make a proposal. People get crazy, and you can't do that. Well, okay, I'll take it back. That was a good illustration of the governor does hear the people.
I think.
The Buffalo Bills Stadium, maybe not so much, but the governor does hear people.
On the housing issue, at least.
Yeah. But I think she is very approachable on things. Mm-hmm. You can have an honest discussion with her. She listens. She'll give you her input. We're not always going to win the arguments. That's life, right? But she listens. Yeah. And I think to the most part. She's been responsive to what's out there.
Yeah, that's an important starting point, of course, for partners in government.
Well, and it was the same. It was the same with the bail law when, and again, we have told our listeners over and over and over. We had the police commissioner here when we spoke about that, saying that somebody didn't just wake up one morning and say, "I got a great idea. I'm going to let people out of jail with no bail." Yeah. Because that seemed to be the impression that was being put, that this was just,
Yeah, there was a narrative created that overstated stuff, but you had example after example of people that really shouldn't be on the street. And then you had people that were robbing banks. I'll see you tomorrow,
Right.
That's just...
it definitely needed addressing.
Of course, and to your point, that's why, I know that earlier, I think you and your colleagues had put some additional bailable offenses, but this time, there were more, again, specifically listed. In addition, there was some additional funding for, I believe, that discovery phase, where a lot of the...
That was a big issue because of the time. They weren't given a lot of time to produce beaucoup documents.
We'd worked with some of the villages on the reforms packages on that. You sometimes people write a bill based on where they are and how something is done, and don't realize in smaller communities there's only one or two people doing some of these functions, and when you decide they should be done in 30 minutes, it's not going to happen. I'm obviously exaggerating.
But the point is made clearly, like you said, you need the capacity. And I know that there were even some tweaks, I think, to, if as long as it was in good faith, that couldn't be really the grounds for maybe a case being dismissed. Like I said, the increased investment in pretrial services, There's, additional, again, even crimes against property that could be now tried that I know was a lot of the discussion around it. And that all said, as Bill mentioned, we've talked to Commissioner Ryder, numerous times. And, the fact is that there was a narrative out there, but the fact is that Nassau continually was known as the safest county of its size in America. So, there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect. But at the same time, I think people, to Bill's point, we see that there's an issue. You need to come to the table and then just kind of parse out. And I know one of the big parts was that there wasn't really strong data. And I think that was something that now is going to be part of this agreement too, to actually have more real-time data on the matter.
I mean, when you look at politics as a whole, one of the most successful tools to try to change or get your way is fear. And people built that stuff up. And, you look at the elections and I don't care what race you're looking at, the commercials are nothing but the tack ads, and no one ever arguing, this is what I want to do to fix stuff. It's all, Billy beat somebody with a bat. Or
nefarious music. Grainy photos. Yeah, so certainly politics is not going to ever be removed from it. That's why I know some people, have talked about the idea of, budget processes where, it's tough because no matter what, you're going to vote for things you don't like versus, the kind of straight, spending kind of program, kind of based budget. I know that's a discussion, that legislators have had and probably will continue to have. But, moving on from that, those two issues, obviously there was a lot of other ones in the budget there. There was the gas tax rebate, which I know, again, the state put, their offer in terms of what the discount would be, but then also gave the ability for counties to give some additional savings. So what is the status of that? Because I know there's been a little bit of back and forth between the Long Island.
The state proposal kicks in June, and I'm the county. I don't want to say I fully understand what they're doing, but I know there's an implementation date that they're going to kick in there also. I think, though, again, we have a situation where we have a dependency on a funding source that is subject to real changes, swings in costs. The cost of the gas and what happened there. And again, maybe it's something we have to keep thinking about. Some of these funding sources we use are subject to inflationary and environmental factors and other things. And when we've got a big dependence and we make it a percentage of the cost, we're going to, obviously a sales tax is driven by the price, but maybe that's not the best way of doing things from a funding standpoint. Also,
the way we were looking at it originally was who we were talking to. It might have been the county controller because they were talking about rescinding the gas tax. And I just kind of mentioned to them that, from my point of view, I'm the consumer. I pay the gas tax now. I got crappy roads. If I don't pay the gas tax later, I'm still going to have crappy roads. What did I lose?
No, I hear you. I think
this is one of the things that it gets my goat so many times just driving down the highway saying this stretch of road sponsored by such and such a company. Now, we've got those gas taxes. That money was supposed to pay for those roads. Why am I asking people to volunteer to clean them up when I've already paid you to do that? That totally gets my, we need all this volunteerism. Where's all the money going? Because it's a lot of money.
Well, probably what we should have is a requirement that we show, and we'll just make up numbers for a minute. From the gas taxes, we raised $10 million just for number, and we spent $10 million, and these are the roads that we did. We should be held accountable if we're saying we're taxing for this purpose to show that's what's being done.
If nothing more than to solely illustrate to the people that we're not getting enough money to do this. We talked to the county executive in Oyster Bay, and he enlightened us a little bit. He said, you realize it cost $1 million a mile. I was kind of stunned by that. I'm thinking, wow, my God, how many guys, there's got to be 200 guys you're paying, $1,000 a minute for that kind of
miles of highway.
But not really. A lot of gear and a lot of materials go into doing 1 mile of road. So for 10 miles, take a road, 110, 10 miles of 110 is $10 million. Wow.
And to that point, we did speak with one of your counterparts in the assembly last week, Assemblymember Salidi, and she and I'm not sure if you were a part of the governor's press conference. I believe was it last week or the week before on Long Island, talking about infrastructure, kind of upgrades and funding streams, that hopefully will make, a big difference on our major highways, southern state. I know, obviously, a big one that we spend a lot of time on, Meadowbrook right near the campus, etc. So that's something we're going to have to obviously stay tuned and see, if this, does make the difference.
And I've been meeting with the troopers. We're working on some safety related proposals and the use of some technology. We're getting real close to having something to say on that. But I think, here's a case where we were trying to do some stuff. Then I sat down with a group of those guys, and we really had a great meeting and threw out a lot of ideas. And we're trying to finalize that stuff now. But I think with the different problems we have, you look at Southern State, just using that as an example. It's basically a road that's 100 years old that was designed for a whole different type of traffic and volume of traffic, it's a roadway that's subject to a lot of accidents. If we get a commercial vehicle on that with any height, they got a shot at hitting one of the bridges because of the way they start. But when I sat down with all those guys, they had a lot of ideas. It was great. I mean, it was one of those meetings where you're not sure anything's going to come out of that, and everybody jumped in. And we're trying to finalize some stuff, but we've got to do a lot more of that, and we try to solve problems in a vacuum instead of bringing a bunch of people in a room and kind of throw some ideas out. So this is a case where those guys were terrific. The first meeting, what I thought might be a half hour, I think we were going for like 2 hours.
And they're out there all the time.
Yeah.
So
yeah. They see it every day, and we know that that's been a big issue that you've paid attention to, especially as the pandemic has kind of gone through its different phases. The resumption, we'll say, of some of the other problems that socially we have, whether they be the opioid epidemic, whether they be other things, but particularly highway safety, traffic safety, and knowing that people are, whether it's road rage, speeding, or just the car crashes that occur, and obviously the people who sometimes face the most danger are those troopers on the highway, and even just like DOT and other personnel. So I know that's always going to be a priority issue of yours, and we'll certainly stay tuned on that front as well. But I guess on another side too, before we just get to some of your closing thoughts and priorities for the rest of the session, the environmental issue, because I know that that's a balancing act too, with gas tax and with roads and cars. But the environmental bond, I did see, got some additional money for its proposal, which would then go to the voters, I believe, this November.
Right.
But what else you think, again, can folks, feel good about, whether it be in the parks, kind of system here, or other things that they'll see, hopefully for environmental protections somewhat in the area?
So I've been fortunate that I've been involved in a lot of meetings with some folks that are exploring a whole bunch of alternatives, biochar and different things. And I think there's a lot of things we can start to do. One of the things they have the ability to, what they say, cook fallen trees, for example.
Okay.
And the product that they end up with is something that can be used as a filter, something that can be used as a fertilizer, so on and so forth. So I joke with the guys. I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. To create this biochar, then I want to put a well on my property that goes down a short well, and I'm going to draw some of the water that is not drinking water up to water my grass. You're going to make the filter out of the biochar that'll filter that out as it comes out, so it's pure, if you will.
Okay.
We're going to put biochar down as a fertilizer, and then, by the way, the pump that we use to bring the water out will be solar driven. So we effectively will have free water, reutilizing water that's not drinkable, but purifying it enough that we could water the grass. And because the biochar as a fertilizer also absorbs water and releases it over time, you'll only have to water the grass, say, twice a week, or whatever the number is. So that's a challenge. But we need to think smarter. The other thing we have to do sometimes is we've set objectives to get stuff done, and we want to move away from the use of fossil fuels, and we sometimes put timetables on that. We've got to make sure that capacity to make that change is there. You know, when we say we want to have buildings and they only can use electric for heat and so on, make sure that we have that capacity. You know, we got a great opportunity here for us to be, harvesting the wind power here on Long Island. It's an ideal place. Well, let's not pretend that's been done and then let's make sure we do that. Let's make sure, we maximize what we can do with solar and other aspects. And that's one of the things that I sometimes worry about. We have these schedules and make a rule, not recognizing there's a prerequisite to our ability to make that change, and we got to make sure that technology is completed. Yeah. And that worries me, and that's why we want to get away from the use of fossil fuels. Some things can be done faster than others. Some things we're going to have to be dependent on certain things for a longer period of time. We can't say no matter what by this year this is going to happen. Well,
yeah, that's what they're doing, though, right? With the internal combustion engine cars. What is it, by 2030 or is it 2050? Yeah. I don't remember the date, but you can't make any more.
No, but I tell you, I've had an opportunity to drive a couple of electric vehicles on some things. They're incredible.
Oh, sure. Right? Expensive as hell, too.
so we can do that.
Rebates, though.
But when we start saying, all buildings have to be this way by a certain year, we got to make sure we have that capacity first.
Yeah, I think one of the scariest things in your occupation, I guess, the lawmaking and that kind of thing, is always the unintended consequences. There was an old story about, a guy in Congress mentioning the idea that, for every problem we solve, we create two. I'm thinking, well, wait, what do you mean? And the example he gave was the days when South Bronx was burned out. He said, okay, here's my problem. I got a building. Now I need to take care of it. So my solution is I'm going to knock it down. And the guy said, after I did that, now I had a pile of rubble and a whole herd of rats.
Yeah.
I created two problems. Before I just had a burned out building. Now I've got two. Yeah. So if that geometric progression continues, the unintended consequences can blow your mind.
But at the same time, you can't have it hinder you from, doing the things
No,
that
you
need
can't.
to be done.
You got to do stuff.
The balancing act, of course.
No, we have to be real with ourselves at the end of the day. And if we want to be to a point, let's put a plan together on how we get there, and let's monitor that plan. And if it's going south on us, then change the objective date or find an alternative way to get there.
Yeah, you don't have to be static.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So certainly we appreciate your time today. We appreciate, obviously, your perspective on a lot of these important policy issues and, of course, the budget. We know that, you do have a lot of pieces of legislation that are going to, hopefully, from your perspective, move, through session here across the finish line. I saw one get passed the other day about the criminal possession of a flamethrower. One of the more catchy, I think, bills out there. There's
I guess we do have to start legislating common sense, right? Is that?
Yeah, that one's a little tougher. So at least you could kind of make.
Look, in recent years, you've seen the directions on regular household appliances. Where they tell you this iron is not to be used in the shower. Okay. I didn't realize we had to tell people that, but those booklets are getting thicker and thicker.
Sorry, I suppose.
Don't hit your kid brother with this thing.
But when you think about that thing, logically, it may be somebody that thinks that washing, instead of doing laundry, you put your clothes on in the shower to accomplish two things at first. So you might as well iron it there, too.
I think there was a Side Note episode or something like that. But
promise you'll come back, Senator Brooks. So we have a lot to talk about still.
Always enjoy it.
Take care. Be well.
Bye-bye.
And now we're very happy to welcome to the show for the first time Dr. Payal Sud, the Interim Chair of Emergency Medicine at Northwell Health's Glen Cove Hospital. Dr. Sood is board certified in both emergency medicine and medical toxicology. She's also an assistant professor at the Hofstra Northwell School of Nursing, as well as the Donald and Barbara Zucker School of Medicine. Okay, the thing on everyone's mind now is, of course, is again COVID. How has it changed? We're seeing different things than we saw with the first couple of waves of, we see
Alpha
people now
variant,
that get it, they
Delta.
test positive, they don't necessarily get very sick, but they may still want to quarantine and they stay away from other people. But so you're the pro. What the heck is going on?
So absolutely, there have been a lot of differences that we're seeing now with patients when they get COVID compared to 2 years ago. The biggest difference is a good majority of our patients are now vaccinated, which means they're protected. So even though they're testing positive and they have the infection, they're not at high risk or serious sequelae like hospitalization, death, or even long COVID, because vaccinations prevent against all of that. So even though we're starting to see some patients testing positive for COVID now, it's nowhere near what we saw 2 years ago in terms of the acuity or how sick patients are. Right. The other thing is there's been a change in the strain. So we started off with the original COVID strain, then we were faced with Delta, and now we're facing Omicron. And overall, even though Omicron is a lot more infectious and virulent, so it spreads a lot faster, the severity of symptoms is lower. So now you have patients that are already well protected because they're vaccinated. And also the strain itself is not as severe. So even though we might see cases, less likely that those cases are going to end up in hospitalization or any serious sequelae.
So
yeah, that's essential. And, we know that you see that experience as your role, obviously, as the interim the interim director, obviously, over there at the emergency department. How can you then say that that's manifested in terms of what you and your colleagues are seeing, in the ER department? We imagine, like you said, thankfully, it isn't the same kind of madhouse, to put it lightly, that you saw at the beginning. So how does that manifest?
Well, people aren't dying as
yeah, thank God.
Right. Knock on wood, the sheer volume has definitely decreased compared to what we saw before when 2 years ago, at this time, I remember almost every single patient that we saw was sick with COVID. And when I say sick, I mean really, really sick, requiring hospitalization, ICU stays and whatnot. That's just not the case anymore. The number of cases that we're seeing have decreased, and also the ones that we are seeing, a good majority of them were able to treat and release, which means treat and send back home. So that's the biggest difference.
Can you track the lifestyle or the life cycle of? We learned a little bit that viruses generally, when they mutate to be less deadly. I guess they usually mutate toward the more mundane kind of. But at times, you can have that one crazy thing. And is this virus in general mutating to a more benign level?
That's a very interesting thought. And, it's still early enough that we can't say with certainty, but it does seem to make sense. Evolutionarily speaking, it is in the best interest of the virus to not kill its host, right? Because you
don't want to kill off the customer, right? Right.
Exactly. Viruses could only survive if they're in a host that's alive. And so the more serious viruses, a lot of times, they're not going to spread as much because once they get into a host, the host is sick. If the host ends up dying, then they can't spread it to somebody else. And I wonder, as you said, it's a astute observation. I wonder if that's what's going on now, where the virus is able to spread, but the host is just not that serious. The thing that is kind of a confounder is, I can't say with 100% certainty if it's just the fact that the virus is less severe, or is it the fact that most of the hosts are now protected, either because they were exposed, so they have that immunity, or they were vaccinated, right? And the host that the virus is facing is a lot more prepared to fight now than we were 2 years ago.
Right.
Yeah,
so you don't have a control group where you get 50 people who haven't taken any precautions, put them in a room, give them the virus, and see what happens.
Yeah, that's been a tough thing, I think.
They don't really want to do that. I guess.
But that being said, the patients that are the sickest, that do require hospitalization, especially ICU stays, are, for the most part, people that have not received the vaccine, or who have received the vaccine but are elderly and have multiple medical problems that make them more immunocompromised.
Right,
the comorbidities, of course, we hear a lot about. And the point I raised before, not just is this obviously a benefit to the patients and their families, that obviously the course of the virus is not necessarily as likely to be deadly, but I'm sure to the ER staff, to the personnel who are working those, constant shifts, as if they were on the front lines of a war, there's a lot of burnout. And, I'm sure that's something that, for people who were there, might be even tough to convey to some of the people who come into, the field now and, heard about it, but didn't necessarily experience it. So can you say about that, maybe how the psyche of your team,
absolutely. I mean, 2 years ago when we first started with this, just like the general public, we had no idea which way this was headed. Is this going to be a virus that kills majority of the hosts or not? How quickly is this going to spread? Are we going to get long-term side effects? We had no idea, but we were all just going in. Thankfully, I must say, working for a health system like Northwell, we were very lucky with the PPE. We never ran out of PPE. We always have adequate PPE. So that was protecting us. Well, we definitely went through the stress of, when we go home, myself, my colleagues, we were changing in our garage and, showering outside the house before we went back to our families and our kids and our elderly parents that we have at home, because we just didn't know how we were going to transmit this virus. If we were going to be the vector putting our loved ones at risk. So that was definitely a concern. I mean, we had some of our staff members who actually had their children go out of state to stay with their parents while they stayed alone. Some other staff members stayed in a hotel room for multiple weeks so that they don't bring the virus back to their newborns at home. Right. So it was definitely a very trying time where we're battling this new virus and, we don't have the support of our family members with us, and we're not able to offer that physical support because we're trying to protect them. Right. Now, it's a lot better. I mean, after we got the vaccine last year, that was such a touching, bittersweet moment. None of us, you can't even describe what we felt. We just felt like, all right, this is it. Now we can finally go to war with the appropriate the weapons we need against this virus. It was, there were tears in all of our eyes when we received the vaccine.
I bet.
And now most of our family members are vaccinated, and it's different. For me personally, being able to hug my 9 and 10-year-olds without having to worry about it is huge.
Yeah, well, those times don't come across. You don't come across those times every day.
Exactly.
They grow up fast. You don't want to lose it.
And I know you mentioned, being armed with, the appropriate weapons now to combat, obviously, disease being the vaccine. But another thing that we've talked to a number of your Northwell colleagues and other, medical professionals throughout the island here is about the therapeutics, the treatments obviously have advanced. So can you talk a little bit about that, how, you see that kind of progress happening?
Sure. There's multiple treatments available right now, right? So a lot of patients who are high risk and we want to keep them outside the hospital, we can treat them with monoclonal antibodies. And we've had great success with keeping high-risk patients from being hospitalized when they get the monoclonal antibodies early. Other than that, we have the oral antivirals, Paxlovid and Molnupiravir available as well. And then when patients are hospitalized, we're still using remdesivir and steroids and other modalities. But again, for the most part, a lot of patients, when they're getting infected now, their symptoms are a lot milder than what we saw 2 years ago.
Yeah, that is definitely, crucial to point out. And, to that point, obviously, again, with this subvariant, with this wave that we see happening, and there is discussion, we'll talk about that in a second, maybe regarding masking, but in terms of patients resuming their routine medical care, we know that that's always been part of this problem too, getting folks to come in for those surgeries that they say, oh, well, it's elective, I'll put it off, it's not that big a deal, but meanwhile it becomes a bigger issue. Even things like the standard course of vaccinations, especially for young children. Can you talk about those kind of issues as well?
Absolutely. So last year in 2021, we definitely saw the effects of that, right? Patients were hesitant to go to their doctors for their routine care, get their antihypertensive medications, their blood pressure medications renewed, or, patients who did not follow up for the elective surgery, I put in quotes, because not necessarily cosmetic, but, having that lump looked at or like that mass removed, which is something that's not emergent, but clearly can have important consequences if that cancer is not caught early enough. Similarly with pediatrics, with a younger population, some of them fell behind on their regular vaccinations because their parents were hesitant taking them into the doctor because the healthcare facilities were viewed as a place where, you might catch COVID. A lot of that has changed now. I think, the messaging has been out there to the community, and we're the volume of patients that fell last year because of this fear of being exposed, where I don't want to go to the hospital if I'm going to get sicker than I am going in. I think a lot of that has now dissipated. The volume's starting to come back in. The confidence that the community has in the healthcare facility itself has risen, because we're starting to see that because, people are coming in now for their routine medical care. They're following up with their doctors. Their doctors are willing to see patients now, because in the past, a lot of the doctors' offices were shut down during COVID when it first hit, right? But now all these offices are open. Patients are able to get their routine care and kind of catch up with everything that they missed out on in the last year and a half.
I have a question about when this first started, people could go to emergency health cares, whatever, get tested for all that. Who's paying the freight now?
So it's a very good question, because it's different, right? The kind of testing that's available. I mean, we all have the antigen tests that we can order through the federal website. If you have school-age children, they're constantly coming home with multiple tests at home. But you also have the PCR tests, which are available at either urgent cares or ERs. And it depends on the insurance. I mean, there's a lot of nuances there. I'm not even going to pretend to say I understand all of them, because it really depends what insurance you have.
But I think that has a lot to do. I think that has a lot to do with who was showing up and who was not showing up. It's not just that I need a vaccine and I'm going to run to the hospital. It was people worried about getting a bill for their testing and getting a bill for their vaccine. Some people were insured two ways. They may have Medicare and they have another and they're still getting a bill.
Exactly.
On top of that, I don't think we can ignore the financial side of this when you're going to start taking attendance about who's coming to the hospital and who isn't. Some of those people need the care, but they're deathly afraid. Northwell put out a thing the other day about telling people that there's no reason not to come to the hospital now because of all the locations they have out.
Right.
And I said, there's one good reason, and it's called bankruptcy.
But that's always been the problem, Bill.
I'm saying, but it's still not going away. We can talk about virus and we can talk about safety and we can talk about all those things, but we don't talk about who's paying the bill.
No,
when
of course.
The federal government supplied a lot of that money. That's the same thing with the governor's budget. I mean, we're in a cash flush atmosphere. People weren't fighting about, well, you can't have this because we can't pay for that. Everything was paid for.
Usually.
They found the money for everything. Now they were just fighting about how it was going to go through.
I mean, I think the key messaging is, because people were afraid of coming to the hospitals because of the virus, I think it's important to get the message out there that if you're sick, you shouldn't wait, whether, the virus or anything else. Because we had so many patients that, had delayed care for their heart disease and they died of heart attacks, strokes, whatnot, because they were afraid to come in because of COVID.
Did we hit the million mark? I thought there was a news story that we did have 1 million fatalities in America due to the virus. We hit that 1 million mark. Yeah.
And then we were definitely creeping up to it.
Yeah. Either way, the point is, and it's tough to have the data, when it comes to this, because sometimes it's unreported. But that goes back to the point of testing. Now the diagnostics being more accessible, although not free. I know a lot of nonprofits, a lot of community-based organizations. They did get them from the state. They get them, from the federal government.
Somebody I know just brought a couple home, but their expiration date is the end of May. Is that like a can of soup? There's a best used by date, I guess, on the soup. But then if I Google it, they tell me, you can keep that soup for 5 years. It'll still be good. Are my testing kits the same way? Or
the effective...
that's a very good question. I wonder that too. I mean, if you're feeling symptomatic and you test positive, I think you can, even though it's expired, you can say that, yes, you're probably positive. Now, if it's negative, we don't know.
Right, then it's questionable. Right. Okay.
Tougher to sort out. Either way, let's remind our listeners that they are listening to this week's Long Island News here on 90.3 WHPC, the radio voice of Nassau Community College. Here with Bill McIntyre, myself, Jon Gallo, and thankfully joined by Payal Sud, who again is the interim chair of emergency medicine at Northwell's Glen Cove Hospital. And again, has a background specifically in emergency medicine and medical toxicology. So,
wouldn't it be nice if the rules stayed the same, Doctor? If it's like this thing keeps changing. Every time you wake up in the morning, you probably have to be briefed and, oh my God, it did a thing overnight, And
that's what makes it tough for the public communicating.
Absolutely.
Of course.
Right. I mean, it's improved now, but I remember when it first hit 2 years ago, we were literally updating our staff every 2 hours that, oh, wait a minute, disregard what we said 2 hours ago. And now we find out that it's this.
Right.
We constantly have to stay on top of it because, as you mentioned, the public's viewing us as the experts. But the truth is, it was something that none of us had seen before.
Yeah. Well, the virus is doing backflips now. We didn't see that last night, But
No, I hear you.
And with this new one, I think that starting to run through, we're starting to hear these stories of these long-term COVID effects, and some of those things are bizarre. Just headaches.
Do you see people still come in, trying to deal with those symptoms? And, has there really been any evolution in terms of treatment for it? Or is it still one of those kind of unknown?
Yeah, so no targeted treatment as such, but people who've been vaccinated are less likely to develop long COVID. We've seen a few patients coming in with sequelae of long COVID, absolutely, but the exact details and pathophysiology of it is still not elucidated. I mean, they're still working on it, but there are programs that Northwell offers, like the CARES program, that are dedicated to take care of these patients who develop long COVID. So if we have anybody that we're concerned about, from the emergency department, we refer them to those programs.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense, of course, for more monitoring and more, testing and everything like that. Okay. So, in addition, to, like we said, the home testing and a lot of these issues that Bill raised, are at play consistently, both the cost, but also, things like immigration status, things like cultural competency of medicine, again, just a lot of barriers that, stop people, unfortunately, from taking care and taking preventative steps of, bettering their health. But, I guess one thing that's been in the news more recently would be the discussion about still trying to increase the vaccination eligibility for young children. So where do you see that and your colleagues? I know your background is in pediatrics, but in terms of maybe just being a parent and a community member, where do things stand now? I know that I think they were trying to get some additional basically confirmation for youth for I forget which vaccine yesterday I heard in the news. But
right, for the under 5. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, so as I mentioned, my kids are 9 and 10, so they got vaccinated when they were eligible. And I mean, as a personal story, so I got COVID last month, actually, about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And it was interesting because I had my vaccines obviously very early on. I had my booster early on, being on the front lines. My husband and my children got it later, when they became eligible for it. And even though I definitely got the Omicron strain based on the symptoms, and it's very contagious, neither my husband nor my children got it. And we live in the same house. And I tested positive 2 days after I became symptomatic. So there were definitely some false negative tests on the antigen test, which is something to, again, keep in mind.
Right.
And so until I tested positive, I'm sure they were exposed, but we tested them repeatedly for the next, week or so. And they stayed negative and asymptomatic the whole time.
Yeah, that's interesting. A similar thing happened at my office where, we're all together and then all of a sudden one person gets it, then you realize, okay, a lot of people are getting it, but then some people didn't. And, vaccination status pretty similar. And, it makes people kind of, just scratch their head, in terms of, what exactly is going on. But nonetheless, the best thing to do is, like you said, get yourself the best odds in case you do contract it.
Exactly.
Okay. So understood. And then, in addition to another item being in the news, next week we're going to talk to the MTA chair, Ms. Rinaldi. I know that there's been discussion around the federal government guidance on mask mandates for air travel, as well as for public transportation, buses, and rail. So, what are your general thoughts, I guess, on that, given what we've kind of been discussing here?
I mean, to be honest, a little conflicted. I'm not sure. Air travel, it's a little bit different the way the air is treated. I mean, again, by no means am I an expert on that, but from what I understand, it's a little bit different the way the air is handled on an aircraft, when it's in motion, not when it's just, on the runway, as opposed to the subway or, any other kinds of public transportation. That being said, if, my family and I are on a very crowded area where we're not aware of the vaccination status or the people that are around us, such as a crowded public place, we'd probably keep our masks on. That being said, if we're in a crowded place around people that we know, and we know they've been vaccinated, and we know they're not symptomatic, such as like a private party at a house or whatever, less likely to keep your mask on then. So I think it's a judgment call. At the end of the day, I think it's refreshing to see that we're moving towards the next phase of, the post-pandemic stage. I know everyone's felt a lot of fatigue, not just the frontline healthcare workers, but everybody's felt that. So, I mean, there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be a little bit of 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but I think eventually we're going to get there.
That's the important thing that we do, of course. And, one other sign of us getting there, we forgot to mention before, in terms of things turning back to normal at the hospital, it seems that the hospital volunteer programs have thankfully come back into the fold. And we know that that's a big thing for folks to feel, welcome and feel like, again, this isn't just, the hospital that, people are afraid of, but the hospital, which is a community institution for care and well-being, more or less.
Absolutely. I mean, having community members, volunteering in the hospital is so huge for the community, for the people who are volunteering, and even for us. It's so refreshing to see them, having our students back and the volunteers. It's been wonderful to have them back.
Yeah. So maybe we get some folks from Nassau Community College heading your way. I'm sure some health professors and other folks who would love for their students to get some, kind of direct experience in a setting like that with great folks like yourself, Dr. Sood. So certainly, thank you so much again for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
And you have to promise to come back if we have more questions.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much.
Keep in mind, again, that is not medical advice for an individual. Please consult your physician, regardless of whatever you heard in this conversation.
Yeah.
There's the disclaimer. But
so
good stuff, Bill.
I just heard a thing on the radio on the way here. I think CBS News reported that the president is looking at the student loan thing. He's not gonna do a blanket $50,000 for each person, but he's looking at something. The thing I wanted to bring up and remind people of is. Okay, you may get a break and your student loans may be forgiven, but the IRS is going to consider that your income. So you're just going to pay a different person when it's all gets said and done. And if it's the IRS, it may be only a proportion of what you originally had to pay for your student loan. But it's not going away.
Always read the fine print, I think, is the moral of the lesson. One of our other probably, kind of adverbs. So. All right, Bill.
The clock on the wall. There we go, John. A clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to move on out of here. We thank you for joining us. Remind you can catch this week's Long Island News every Friday at 3 o'clock right here on 90.3 WHPC.